listening to Let's Talk Sustainable Business.
It is a pleasure to welcome you to this special episode of Let's Talk Sustainable Business. We have just come to the end of season 5, featuring conversations with a fantastic lineup of guest speakers from organizations such as the Climate Finance Fund, EcoAge, and the European Commission, among others. Throughout the season, we delved deep into the core pillars of ESG, unpacking their complexities. We also tackled the ever present issue of greenwashing and its various implications. Joining me is Barbara Mendes-Jorge, a sustainability communications expert and the host of our Let's Talk Sustainable Business podcast. Today, the positions have reversed, and Barbara finds herself sitting in the interview chair. She'll be sharing some of the highlights and key takeaways of the season 5. Barbara, welcome to Let's Talk Sustainable Business.
Hi, Anu. It feels pleasantly strange to be the one being interviewed, but thank you for having me today.
Barbara, to get us started, can you please tell us a bit more about the themes you covered in the season 5 and also the guests you've hosted so far?
So, yes, the broad themes of this season are what is greenwashing and how can companies avoid it? And as you mentioned, we zoomed in on the specifics of E, S, and G and how companies should approach environmental, social, and governance factors when communicating about sustainability. We also discussed a range of EU policy developments relating to these areas throughout the season. I interviewed 7 people from wide ranging backgrounds on these issues, and it was really interesting to gain insights from these differing perspectives. We had a governance expert, a startup founder, a sustainability communications expert, and a representative from the EU institutions, to name a few. So, the first 2 episodes, I spoke to sustainable finance expert Marilyn Waite about her work mobilizing capital for climate solutions, as well as how the ESG sector is developing. We also went deep into EU sustainability policy, as Marilyn was previously on the board of EFRAG, who advises the European Commission on the CSRD and ESRS, which, as we know, is very important for companies in Europe to follow. And in her episodes, Marilyn answered the question of what she would do if she was the CEO of a company who was lagging behind on sustainability reporting. So if you're one of those companies, I'd really advise listening to her episodes to listen to her advice. And of course, I'd also recommend Marilyn's episodes to anyone looking to have a more sustainability focused career, because she's written a book on this topic called Sustainability at Work. The second edition will be out any day now, and I will say I'm biased because I was one of the people interviewed in the book, but even if I hadn't been, I would highly recommend it because her insights are very interesting.
Wow, that's quite a big range, as well as it seems very powerful. You briefly talked about the topic of greenwashing and its impact on an organization's reputation, finances, as well as talking about EU policy in the realm of the EU Green Claims Directive. Can you briefly share some of the key takeaways for companies?
Sure, greenwashing is a topic very close to my heart. I regularly run anti greenwashing trainings for a range of organizations, so it was really good to dive deep with other experts. I was particularly delighted to chat to Louise Ayling from Radley Elder because her company RY have produced what I feel is a fairly definitive guide to credible sustainable communications called Words That Work. In her words, sustainability communications can often be filled with those cliches and meaningless statements like sustainability is in our DNA. And we've all seen those images of polar bears, wind turbines, hands holding a green earth when companies talk about sustainability. And it demotivates when it should be motivating and inspiring. So, in her episode, she talks about this issue of what they've termed stock sustainability and what companies can do to avoid it. That includes avoiding jargon, using evidence to back up claims, and embracing vulnerability to become more transparent. And she also talks about her work on sustainability communications with clients such as Johnson & Johnson and Microsoft. So there's plenty for listeners to be inspired by. So if you're worried your company may be greenwashing, that's the episodes to listen to, Louise's episodes. But for listeners interested in exploring how greenwashing can negatively impact a company's reputation, then I recommend listening to my conversation with experienced sustainability campaigner George Harding Rolls from EcoAge. In his previous job at the Changing Markets Foundation, he set up a website called greenwash.com, a platform which helps consumers recognize the variety of tactics that companies in the plastics, food, and fashion sector specifically use to greenwash and reveal the scale of the problem. So, with his campaigning background, we discussed how greenwashing can impact how consumers view companies and why businesses can benefit reputationally and financially from being sustainability pioneers. With George, we also talked about his views on the EU Green Claims Directive, and a few episodes later, I got to talk to the person responsible for the preparation and negotiation of this directive. That was the European Commission's Malgorzata Golebiewska. And her episodes are absolutely essential listening for anyone working in sustainability communications in Europe, because she takes us through how the directive will impact companies across the continent. And we discuss, for example, how independent verification will be key in future, how companies must prove the factual basis for their green claims, and the onus is now on them and not consumers. So what will this mean in future? I also appreciated the fact that she answered the question of how the directive will affect SMEs compared to medium and large sized businesses, because I know that's a hot topic. And she also talked about how sustainability trailblazers should be a source of inspiration for anyone lagging behind on sustainability communications.
Thank you. It seems like very comprehensive, and I really like the book you talked about. And maybe I'm going to ask you to repeat the title of the book because that's something always interesting for our listeners. Could you do that again for me, please?
Absolutely. The book that I mentioned was written by our previous guest, Marilyn Waite, and it is called Sustainability at Work.
Sustainability at work. That's something for us to look out for. Right. You also mentioned that you focused individually on each aspect of ESG. Can you share with us some key insights, something which stood out for you, and some aha moments?
Absolutely. I really wanted to have a guest relating to each of the letters in ESG, and I managed, which was great. So, on environment, I chatted to Mary Granstrom. She's the CEO and founder of Origin by Ocean. They're a company that rids the oceans of algae and turns it into everyday goods. So, that's an interesting one because we both got very specific on the topic of ocean eutrophication and how she uses biorefinery technology to turn this harmful algae into ingredients used for everyday products. So, we also had wider discussions on the joys and challenges of founding a startup, as well as other environmental EU policy strategies, such as the EU Blue Bioeconomy Strategy and the EU Chemicals and EU Plastics Strategies. So, in her episodes, we cover a lot of topics relating to environment. For S, the socially focused episode, I chatted to Genica Schaefgen from Ecosia. That's the company best known as being the search engine that plants trees, because it uses advertising revenue gained from searches for tree planting projects. Genica is also a board member of the Social Entrepreneurship Network Germany, so we also discussed the development of social entrepreneurship and how her network provides support for and lobbies on behalf of this group. Genica's interview was particularly inspiring for me because I feel that Ecosia are a company that really walks the walk when it comes to sustainability. Because not only have they created a business model around planting trees, but the company also publishes its financial reports every month. So you can see how much it spends on trees, green investments, taxes, social security, etc. And I really don't know many or any other big companies doing this. But one, I think, aha moment, or one slightly depressing aspect was from talking to Genica, was that when I asked her about whether Ecosia were looking to collaborate with other companies on planting trees, because companies do want to show their commitment to sustainability, she said that many companies wanted the kudos of planting trees without actually putting the money forward needed to do it responsibly, because planting trees is not just that. You know, you might need to tend to the soil or do other investments in biodiversity before you can even plant the trees. So, as someone working in sustainability, sensitive to greenwashing, it didn't surprise me, but it did make me sad. But I hope it becomes a lesson for companies that if you want to communicate about the positive impact you're making on the planet, you have to really invest in every aspect. And then finally, for the G, governance, we talked to a true expert in this area, Professor Guy Jubb. He's honorary professor at the University of Edinburgh Business School, but he's also co-chair of the Conference Board's European Corporate Governance Council. And I was happy to talk to him because he was one of the first people in the UK to have governance in his job title. So he clearly knows a lot about the topic. And governance is often ignored in sustainability discussions. But as we know, with legislation such as the CSRD coming into play, companies are going to have to report on this much more. So his episodes are a real crash course in how corporate governance has developed, which topics are particularly important, such as compensation, private equity assurance, and of course, greenwashing. And Guy also outlined in great detail the advice he would give to shareholders, board members, asset managers, investors, and others on sustainability. And he came with some words of wisdom, including there are 50 shades of sustainability and there is no monopoly on wisdom. Why? You'll have to listen to find out.
Thank you. Thank you, Barbara. You talked in the middle about the need for organizations to be communicating very clearly, especially in light of the greenwashing, irrespective of the EU Green Claims Directive. What takeaways or insights would you want to share for executives about communicating sustainability to the wider organization?
Yeah, for each guest that we had on, I always asked them to give their advice to companies, especially on communicating sustainability or incorporating sustainability more into their world. And I think the key takeaways from the episode were firstly, transparency and authenticity are important. I think companies should be less worried about whether consumers will think negatively about them if they share their challenges and be less focused on what their competitors are doing. Sustainability trailblazers can only benefit from being more open. And we know from data as well that sustainability has become an increasingly important reason why people want to go and work for companies across many different sectors. So the more openly you communicate with your employees about what you're doing, any course corrections, it's going to be very important for keeping them motivated. Secondly, our guests shared a lot of resources, and it's clear that there are plenty of resources out there to help and inspire companies to communicate about sustainability to the wider organization and more broadly. There are sustainability trailblazers that you can look at for inspiration. You can use guides like RY's Words That Work to do the same. There are plenty of existing resources out there which can help companies who want to do more on sustainability and want to communicate more to their organizations. Finally, perhaps most importantly, request more support when you need it. So, you and I know, Anu, that upcoming EU and global legislation on greenwashing and sustainability reporting can be quite daunting to a lot of companies. They're going to have to report far more transparently and openly than ever before. While there are resources out there, it's likely that people who are lagging behind on sustainability will struggle. So they shouldn't hesitate to reach out to organizations like the Conference Board for support, or companies providing services such as carbon footprint mapping, or consultants who are EU policy experts, because it's better to invest in those services than get penalized for not following legislation.
Thank you. Wow, you've had some amazing conversation, very insightful. It seems you've spoken to a lot of interesting people as well. Give us a flavor of what kind of themes and guests can we expect in season 6?
Yes, I'm happy to announce that we've already started recording episodes for season 6. I'm delighted to be back as host. And I've already had discussions relating to bio based materials, the circular economy, and making cities more sustainable. And other topics that we'll hopefully discuss include sustainable tourism, biodiversity, and food. There are likely even more topics on the table, but I will keep them under wraps for now. But I'd also like to take this opportunity to ask our listeners, the Let's Talk Sustainable Business listeners, whether there are any topics they'd like us to cover. So don't hesitate to get in touch if there's any hot topics that you'd like us to discuss, or even suggestions for guests.
Thank you, Barbara. Thanks a lot for joining us today for this wrap up episode. And thanks to our listeners. We'll be back in September with season 6, so don't forget to subscribe to our channels to stay updated. Thank you.